Hello again. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another live stream with me, Lar Ryan from Complete Test Success. So today we're just doing a Q&A. So this is very straightforward. You come to me with any questions you have about the IELTS test. It could be questions about problems you're having. It could be questions about what to do in the different parts of the IELTS test. It could be questions about how to improve in the various aspects of the IELTS test. So whatever it is, whatever problems you're having, whatever confusion you're having, whatever things you can't, whatever information you don't have, just let me know. And I will be happy to answer whatever questions you have for you. That's pretty much what we're doing today. So typically, if you look at my Facebook page and my YouTube channel, you can see that I've kind of gone through how to do the various parts of the test. So I would recommend, going there, completing those. I have one-on-one support. So like, some people that can come along, they can watch videos about how to improve. They can see what they're doing wrong. They can see what they need to do, and that's enough to get their scores. But there are other students then who need more hands-on support. So, be it getting feedback on their writing, getting feedback on their speaking, being guided through the process of improving their writing, their reading and listening scores. So if you need one-on-one support, that's my email address, lar@completetestsuccess.com. Send me an email if you're interested in joining my courses. We can talk about that. Hello, sir. Hi to you. Welcome. Shaksrior. Hello to you. Good evening. Doing very good. Thanks. A bit more tired than normal, but in a good mood for sure. Hi, Magnolia. Welcome to the lesson. Spicy, I watched your videos about academic writing task 1, and you mentioned that in the overview, you should never write data and just cover broad. But my teacher said I should include data. What do you think? Yeah, so your teacher's after giving you the wrong information. If you include data in an overview, you will immediately get a band 5 for task achievement. You could potentially get a lower score by making other mistakes, but there's nothing you can do to bring your task achievement score higher than a band 5 if you've made that mistake. So maybe your teacher didn't realize that. I doubt very much that your teacher was intentionally giving you incorrect information, but that is 100% definitely going to result in a band 5 for task achievement. When examiners correct IELTS writing task 1, academic IELTS writing task 1, the first thing they will look for is the overview. Because if I see an overview that has data in it, I don't need to check the body paragraphs as carefully because I already know it's a band 5. So I don't need to worry like, oh, is this a 7 or an 8? Like I already know it's a 5. So I don't need to pay as much attention to the other to the body paragraphs if I find a mistake like this in the overview. So definitely that is something that you need to avoid. Ken Clark, good to see you here. Can you take a mock exam for me, please? Because no one can tell me the right feedback. Yeah, so I have practice speak and test service. I have essay correction service. And then I have full courses where I guide you kind of more hands-on support, guiding you through the test. So yeah, like I said, reach out there, or you can find my courses and services on my website as well. Hang on now, and let me just find the link. I'll share that with you there. I'll just say IELTS courses and services. So by services, I mean one-on-one mock speaking tests and essay corrections, which are also included in the courses. Hi, Prince Nahin, welcome. Yes, he just said he disagrees with not including data, but I guess he didn't know. Yeah, I mean, there's no way he's going to intentionally give you the incorrect advice. I mean, I doubt very much that there would be anyone who would, take any pleasure from that. So I'd assume it's just a misunderstanding. Like I said, I've been an IELTS examiner, so I'm very confident about that. Prince Nahin, sir, IELTS writing task 2 introduction often seems memorized, yet logical. What's the solution to this? So there might be phrases that you would use but I guess all vocab is memorized to an extent. But where it becomes a problem is if you have, for example, a thesis statement that you are going to use in every discuss both views question type. So, maybe you've memorized a sentence, something like, this essay will discuss both views, although it is my opinion that the first view is correct. Now, you can say that. It doesn't matter what the question is about. You could put that sentence into every essay where you're asked to discuss both views and give your own opinion. But the thing is, it shows no connection to the question. So when the examiner sees that, and they're going to see that and go, okay, that's, it's in no way related to the essay. It seems memorized. I'm not going to use that sentence to determine this person's, task achievement, coherence and cohesion, vocab or grammar scores. So basically, if the vocab and grammar are good, it doesn't really count because it's obvious that it's not related to the question and therefore very likely has been memorized beforehand. So where you might feel like memorized sentences are great because you know what to say, the vocab will be correct, you can memorize a range of vocab, the grammar will be correct, but ultimately the examiner isn't going to be fooled by that. So it's not the best choice. But of course, memorizing phrases, memorizing phrases that you want to use in the test, well, that's the same as learning vocab. So there's nothing wrong with learning vocab or phrases that you want to use, but you don't want to learn full sentences. You don't want to learn full essays or anything like that. So you need to depend more on your own ability. Like the students who join my courses, I don't teach them to always say this, always say that. I'll just show them what's required. So if you're writing a task 2 essay, paraphrase the question, give your opinion, say what your main ideas are. So we're talking about the introduction. Paraphrase the question and give your opinion, outline your main ideas. And of course, your main ideas must be relevant and specific. So that's what I'm explaining to you. And after that, then I'll start getting you to submit your writing and I can see, okay, you forgot to mention your opinion here. That means that you can't get a band 7 in task response, or that idea was irrelevant. That means that you can only get a band 5 in task response. So, it's about learning what to do, but then seeing if you can apply that. And, you might be making mistakes, and just getting that guidance is important. But what you're talking about, having full memorized chunks or sentences, it doesn't work. Unfortunately, that is not a wise or suitable way to improve your IELTS scores. And the reality, I think what happens to a lot of students is, maybe their vocab isn't good enough and they're trying to find a way to get their score without improving their vocab. And that's where you get like a lot of kind of these myths that you will find online about how to improve your IELTS scores. They come from people who are in that situation. They're going like, I don't want to improve my vocab. That's going to take me forever. That's going to take me way more time and way more effort than I want to put into this. And then they start looking at these people with like these little tricks and hacks how to get a high score. And because they're trying to avoid doing a lot of work, they go like, okay, I'm just going to try this. So I think that's where a lot of it comes from is, these memorized sentences, they make it sound like it's going to be easier, but they don't result in a high score. Iolig Beck, good evening, welcome. Kent Clark, do you think that for students having problems communicating, i.e. socially inept, they should work on that as well as their English? Yeah, you definitely get some people who are just very introverted, very shy, not very confident communicators. And in the IELTS speaking test, that will go against you big time. That will be a big disadvantage. You will definitely meet people who have got, very strong ability in writing, but when it comes to speaking, they're just so shy that they can't communicate. They get very nervous. I guess like that's an aspect outside of your language ability. But part of your fluency and coherence score is like, can you communicate? Can you develop your answers fully? Are you willing to develop your answers without being pushed? So yeah, if it's somebody who just doesn't want to talk, it doesn't matter how good their vocab, grammar, pronunciation are. They're not getting a high score if they're not going to talk. It's not easy for those people, and it's just their personality. It's unfortunate that they're in that situation where they're very, very uncomfortable speaking, but they have no choice. If they're serious about getting the IELTS score they need, they have to overcome that. So yeah, you have to. They have to. Spicy, I take the exam in a couple of days, and I think I still have a bit of trouble with generating relevant ideas for task 2. Do you have any last-minute advice? Yeah, made a video on this recently. Maybe I'll just share that with you. Give me a second there. Yeah, so it's a video I just shared. A video I just had last week. Thinking ideas. Task 2. I'll just share that link with you because I've just literally gone through that there last week. But I think very often what people do is they overcomplicate things. So just try and keep it simple. Simple ideas are generally good. Easy ideas are easier to develop. But yeah, just take a look at that video that I just linked there. You'll see a few different methods you can use to hopefully make it easier for you. Hi, Vanessa. Do we need to put examples for every question? And how do we know whether we should put examples or not? Thank you. So in IELTS writing task 2, you must develop your ideas. One way to develop your ideas is by including examples. Another way to develop ideas is to include explanations. So let's say I have 2 ideas. You need to develop both of them. If there are only 2 ideas in your essay, you need about 100 words. You need to write about 100 words for each idea. So if that's just explanations, just examples, a mixture of explanations and examples, whatever way you develop that idea is fine, but you must develop it. So it's not that you have to have an example, it's that you have to develop your ideas. And an example is one way to do that. So it's not that some situations it's okay, in some situations it's not okay. It's always okay. It's always okay to use examples to develop your ideas. So it's just up to you. Like, is it going to be easier for you to explain it? Maybe your explanation is so long that that's already 100 words, so you don't need an example. To be honest, when you only have 2 ideas in your essay, typically the easiest thing to do is explain your idea and then give an example. That's normally the easiest way to develop an idea fully. But it's not that an example is mandatory. It's not that you must have one. It's that it's an option you have. You can do that. If that's easy for you, great. If there are other ways to develop ideas that you find easier, then that's what you should do. Adil, hi Adil. Hi sir, I hope you are fine and doing well. Thank you, I am, all good. In overviews of writing task 1 maps, is it acceptable to write that more classes were built or the farmland has been replaced with residential facilities? I'm curious that these are specific for overview. Those would be too specific. I wouldn't include something that specific. You know, if there were more classes built, is it that like it's the same size but more classrooms? So they're like there were 4 big classrooms and now there are 8 small classrooms. So you know, you might say that there are more rooms. There are more rooms now than before. Or if it's an extension that, you know, it's the same size here, but they've built extra classrooms to the side, you might say the building has been extended to facilitate more rooms, something like that. But you want to give a general description. Once you start including specific features like this, like you've written in your comment, that can bring down your score. So you want to be careful with that. Kent Clark, I've met people who are willing to speak, but the way they express their thoughts and present their opinions are just so confusing to understand. Yeah, so that would fall under the fluency and coherence. So in the speaking test, you have fluency and coherence, vocab, grammar, and pronunciation. So in fluency and coherence, is the answer coherent? That's a part. That's a part of that score. Like, can you be understood? Does it make sense? Are you talking about what you were asked to talk about? All of that falls under the fluency and coherence band score. So it's not just can you say lots of words? It has to make sense, and it has to be related to the question that you've talked about. You can't just stay repeating the same points over and over again. So I know you're teaching IELTS, Lam. So like, why do you think people are doing that? So they present their opinions, but they're just so confusing to understand. So what happens with some students, I had a speaking test with a student earlier today. They were making this mistake where they weren't giving themselves time to think about what they were going to say. So they start speaking, but they don't know what they want to say. Even though they've started, they have no idea how they're going to finish the sentence. So that's one problem, is if you start too quickly, you don't know what you want to say yet, you're likely to run into this situation. This student was also trying to speak quickly, which isn't necessary, but they thought they needed to speak quickly for a high fluency score. So they had no idea what they wanted to say, but they were trying to say it quickly. And it was quite incoherent. And it wasn't that the student didn't have the ability to speak clearly. It's that they were putting themselves under extra pressure, trying to speak quickly, trying not to give themselves time to think, trying to do everything very fast. And, it didn't work. It wasn't effective. But then you might have another student who they're willing to speak, as you've said, but they just don't have the vocab. So it might be a vocab problem or a grammar problem, and that's why, it's confusing. But depending on the students, depending on the reason for it being confusing, the advice that you need to give that student would differ. So if the student has a vocab problem, that would be what you need to advise them to work on. But if they're trying to speak too quickly, well, then that's what they need to do differently. So, when you're teaching IELTS, it's important not just finding the problem, but finding the source of the problem, because that's often how you're going to help the student overcome their issues. It might not always be obvious. Sometimes, you might think, oh, like for example, with the student I was talking about earlier on, from listening to them, I thought maybe this student is trying to speak quickly. So that was a conversation we had. And I asked him, I was like, were you trying to speak quickly? And he said, yes, I was. I was like, okay, perfect. So there's the problem. But very often when you're teaching a student, you're guessing why they're making the mistake based on their performance, but you'll have to talk to them about it and trying to see, like, are your ideas correct or incorrect? And sometimes it'll be wrong and you need to talk to them a bit more and kind of get to the bottom of what's the cause of the problem. And once you've identified the cause of the problem, then the solution becomes very obvious. So, when you're dealing with your students, try and follow that path and try and dig a bit deeper to figure out what's resulting in this confusing, these confusing answers that you're describing. Hi, Forsyth. When I practice answering IELTS questions in part 1, I don't know when to stop. You don't need to stop. What I would say is continue talking until you have nothing else to talk about. Don't go back and start repeating the same points again. So inevitably, whatever you're talking about, you'll have said everything you wanted to say. That's when it's time to stop. If your answers are very short, that's not a good thing. But if your answers are quite long, that's not a problem. But what will happen if you give long answers is the examiner will interrupt you and they'll just say, thank you, and they'll ask you the next question. That's not a bad thing at all. So if your answers are short, you should work on improving your fluency and developing your answers more fully. If your answers are too long, that's not your problem. That's the examiner's problem, and let them deal with that. Hi, Lewis. Good to see you. Atiku Zaman. Big fan. Thank you so much. Welcome to the lesson. Mandeep. Good morning, dear sir. Morning, Mandeep. I have a very important question that the vast majority of students use AI to write their essays, which are too academic, and normally we can't write like this. So do we use it? No, I wouldn't recommend using AI to write your essays. The vocab isn't typical. So like it uses vocab as if like if you're an expert in your field, the way you would talk about a topic when you're a complete expert and the vocab you would use to talk about that topic as a complete expert, that's how AI sounds. So it wouldn't be normal words that everybody is using, like in a normal essay. So, you know, you're not expected to be an expert on every topic and talk about a topic as if you're an expert. So the vocab tends not to be suitable for students to learn from. So if you're looking at essays written by AI, you might end up being a bit overwhelmed by the vocab, and you might end up seeing vocab that isn't very helpful for you anyway. Having said that, of course, the vocab is great. It's just not great for students to learn. The grammar obviously is going to be correct. But what I found over and over again with essays I've seen, like sometimes students will submit essays that have been written by AI. That, like, I never get more than 2 sentences through the essay where like this isn't written by a person. They just don't seem natural yet. And look, AI is advancing so quickly, it probably won't be too long until, you know, they can fool me. But at the moment, when I read an essay written by AI, it's like, just, this doesn't look like it's written by a person. I have an app that I can use to check, and you know, there have been one or two cases where I did get caught. I had a Stan. He joins these live streams a lot, and he was on my course. He submitted an essay once that I thought was written by AI, and I actually checked it in the app, and the app said it was written by AI. So there was that one time where I was wrong, but besides that, it's always quite obvious. One of the big problems with AI, nearly always AI will get a band 6 for task response because its ability to develop ideas is not very strong. It tends to start with an idea and then just goes completely on a tangent. So generally what you would look at is great scores for vocab and grammar, but not very strong scores for task response and coherence and cohesion. Ken Clark, some go with ideas they haven't really thought through, such as things they've seen once, but they don't really understand. So it's a rule for my students now to do some knowledge check. So what I would say is they feel like they can't talk about normal stuff. So what's happening to your students is they think that in the IELTS test, they need to talk about things as if they're an expert on the topic. They need to talk as if, like, imagine if you're in a job interview, you're going to try and be very formal and sound very knowledgeable and sound like, you know, you're friendly but hardworking, and you've all these other things that you're trying to get the person to think that, you know, they should give you the job. So like the way you would talk in a job interview, or the way you would talk if you're giving a presentation, a lot of students, like, they try to talk like that when they're in the IELTS test. But the reality is the best score you're going to get is, how would you talk if you were talking to a friend? If you're just hanging out with a friend talking about this topic, what would you say to your friend in that situation? What would you talk about? Not pretending you're an expert, just saying what you think. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. And also allowing yourself to use the vocab and the grammar that you would normally use, instead of trying to use like high-end good vocab and difficult grammar. Just allow your students to say whatever they want to say on the topic. As long as they're talking about the question that they were asked, then it's fine for them to say whatever they want. They don't need to sound smart. They don't need to sound knowledgeable. They don't need, you know, none of that stuff. So it could be that they're putting themselves under pressure to kind of perform instead of just talking like they would outside the IELTS test. So it could be that might be the problem as well. Vanessa, sir, in IELTS, we are supposed to write a minimum of 250 words, but what is the maximum numbers in your opinion? Maximum, so in task 2, like if you're writing more than 300, it's not good for your time management. I recommend about 280 words. 300, you're going too long. 320, you're way too long. 350, that's, you know, you're not going to get a good score because you're going to have too many vocab and grammar mistakes. So think of it in that if you write 280 words and you have time left to go and read your essay again and fix your vocab and grammar mistakes, what score is that going to get compared to a much, much longer essay where you just wrote it and barely got it finished on time, handed it in without checking for mistakes. And the other thing then is, typically speaking, longer essays will be less focused. So you want like an idea that's relevant and specific, you want to develop it. Another idea that's relevant and specific, you want to develop it. So what you'll find is students who write, or candidates who write longer essays, tend to be less focused and tend to get lower scores because of that. And then there will be more mistakes than they could have had. You know, they potentially could have had a higher score if they had time to fix it. So yeah, about 280 is good. Hi, Javier. I have general training exam 2 times. I did the general training exam 2 times. First attempt, I got 7 in speaking, but second time only 6 in speaking. Should I apply for EOR? Yeah, I mean, the first thing you would do is go back and consider if anything went wrong in the test. Like, can you explain why your score was so much lower? Did something go wrong? Was the topic very difficult for you? You know, were you repeating yourself more often? Were you pausing more? Maybe the topics are less familiar, so the vocab wasn't as good. You know, was there anything like that? So before you would apply for an EOR, try to explain to yourself why the score is lower. And if you can't think of any reason why it was lower, there's a good chance an EOR will improve your scores. Yeah. Spicy advice I found useful for speaking is just slow down. Really helped me keeping that in mind. Yeah. So going too slowly is a problem for your fluency score. So, you know, if you're speaking very slowly, that's a problem. But a lot of people speak too fast. So for people who speak too fast, slowing down is an important step. But for people who are speaking very slowly and they're trying to think of what to say next, that's no good either. So yeah, if you have been speaking too fast, slowing down is important. And dear sir, in speaking part 2, do we need to follow the bullet points, or we can say something more means adds like description, detail, opinion? Yeah. So you don't need to follow the bullet points. You can talk about anything you want within the context of the question. So the topic at the top, describe something. You must talk about that, but underneath like you should talk about A, B, C, D. You don't need to worry about that stuff. So no, you do not need to discuss the bullet points, but what you're talking about must be the topic, definitely. Lewis, I have a pronunciation problem. I've noticed that people understand me well when I speak at a slow pace, but they don't understand me well when I speak at a native speaker's pace. So, who are those people? Would be the first question. Are you sure it's not their listening skills? You know? So, like the way I would talk to my family versus the way I talk to my students, like most people would find it difficult to follow a conversation with my family because the language we use would be, you know, unique to where I'm from, the types of phrases we're using, the context, my accent would be heavier when I'm speaking with someone from the same country as me. So it could be the listener, you know, it could be the listener, or it could be, you know, maybe you're not pronouncing the individual sounds clearly, or maybe when you speak faster, you're not pausing at the correct parts of each sentence. So it depends. It depends. It could be your fault. It could be the poor listening skills of the people you're talking to. It's difficult to say what the problem is based on what you've described. It could be a number of things. Sir, is it okay to use phrasal verbs in writing, such as make ends meet? No. Warm to football. I don't know what warm to football means, etc. Are there any rules for understanding which phrasal verbs are formal, which are informal? So you're talking about idioms, idiomatic phrases. They're generally informal. Most phrasal verbs are informal. So, you know, if you're not sure, you'll have to research them when you're learning them. So make sure that you include that as one of the things you check when you're learning vocabulary. In general, phrasal verbs are informal. So it's not that they're all informal. Like when someone says don't use phrasal verbs, what they mean is most phrasal verbs are informal, so don't use informal language. But for neutral or formal phrasal verbs, ones that aren't informal, it's no problem using those. That's completely okay. Mandeep, dear sir, is it important in speaking part 3 to give an example in every single question? No, you don't have to give examples in part 3. Again, examples are easy ways to say more if you can't think of what to say. And it depends on your level. So like for lower level students, if you're going into speaking part 3 and you're always thinking, I don't know, I can never develop my answers. I never know what to say. I can't think of what I should say next. So if you're like that, where it's always a challenge to think of stuff, examples are great because it just gives you that, like, A, B, C. Okay, next question, A, B, C. And it gives you a structure to follow. But for higher level students who can speak comfortably in English, they generally don't need to. They'll just answer the question. And just like in a normal conversation, when you're talking with your friends, you're not thinking about, okay, now I've explained it, next I'm going to give him an example. You don't think like that when you're having a conversation. So for a higher level student, just allowing yourself to chat, and when you're talking to a friend, it's just the next thing that kind of comes into your head. As you're speaking, you're reminded of something. So you start talking about that next, and that reminds you of another thing, and you start talking about that next. So you'll see, like, the way conversations go, you're just kind of following your thoughts, and there's always a little connection from point to point. They're in some way related. So just allow yourself to speak in that way, but it depends on your level. So if you're a lower level and it's a big challenge for you to say anything, then it's great to answer the question, explain, example. If you're stronger, just allow yourself to follow your train of thought and just talk as you would when chatting with somebody. Spicy, I was wondering if you had any tips for English or sound, as I'm often having a hard time pronouncing it in certain words. Or when I'm talking faster. So with all pronunciation, you just need to slow down. Like, start with how to pronounce that sound. So like, where do you put your tongue? Like, and the sound is going around the sides of your tongue. So learn how to form that sound first. Practice that alone. Then practice words with that sound. Do it slowly, take your time, get it right. Over time, you're reforming your muscle memory. So you're training your mouth where to go when it's making that sound. At the moment, your mouth is going to the wrong position. It's doing the wrong thing. So you have to train your mouth to automatically go to the correct place. So you do it slowly but surely, lots of slow practice. Start with the sound, move to the word. After that, move to full sentences. But again, going really slowly and just making sure that you get it right. Getting it right slowly over and over and over again, and eventually your mouth just kind of learns where to go and what to do. It takes time and effort, but that's how you do it. Versailles, I tend to go on a tangent in speaking part 3. It's hard for me to stay on topic because I have a lot of things to say about a general question. That's fine. That doesn't sound like a problem, to be honest with you. As long as it's obvious, like if it's like, what's the most popular sport in your country? And you go, oh, the most popular sport is cricket. I love eating chicken sandwiches when I get home from work. It's like, how did that happen? Like, how do we get from there to there? If it's completely out of nowhere, that's not okay. But if you answer the question, like, oh, most popular sport is cricket, but nowadays, actually, what you'll find is basketball is getting more popular. A lot of the schools have basketball courts now. So like, you kind of went on a tangent, but it's still obviously linked to what you were talking about. That's okay. As you've been an ex-examiner, how did you recognize memorized answers in speaking? There are several things. There are a few different things. The way the student talks is different. The pronunciation is different. The delivery is different. The quality of the language is not the same as their performance previously. So like, imagine they're speaking at a band 5 level and now suddenly they're speaking at a band 8 level in terms of vocab and grammar. So it's usually like a big jump in the quality of the vocab and grammar. The delivery, the pronunciation is different. The intonation is different. Very often, the way the answers are structured it's kind of obvious that everything has been written in advance. Because when you're writing, you can kind of structure things in a way where you can set up the point that you're making, like kind of give the background first with, like, although da 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 da, and then like you can talk about the outcome. So what you'll find is the types of structures are so well thought out in advance that it doesn't reflect the way people speak. Because when you're speaking, there isn't time to set something up as like, okay, I'm going to say that first and set up the context and then come with the next thing. It all just kind of comes out very in a more disorganized way. So what you'll find is the answers tend to be overly well organized. That's another sign. So all of those things. So yeah, that and probably other things as well, but those are the things that come to mind. Magnolia, I have a question about speaking. I have difficulty giving a straight answer quickly, whereas IELTS exam seems to me to expect us to speak quickly. No, you have time to think. Like, you don't really have to, you don't have a minute to go and research your answer, but you have 2 or 3 seconds to think. And if you're thinking, I don't know the answer to that question, well, you don't need to know the answer. It's not the type of test where it's not a knowledge test where you have to have the correct answer. So again, just say, for example, it's what's the most popular sport in your country, and the truth is you don't know. Well, it doesn't matter if you do or don't know. You don't need to give me the correct answer. I just need you to speak so I can check your fluency, vocab, grammar, pronunciation. So if the real answer is cricket and you say rugby, doesn't matter. Like, doesn't matter that you're wrong. I just need you to talk. So don't put yourself under too much pressure to be knowledgeable on all the topics. It's basically you're being asked, guess. I don't care whether you're right or wrong. I just want you to talk so I can check, your level. So yeah, maybe you're putting yourself under too much pressure in that sense. But if it might be another problem, it might be that, you're not very fluent in English, so it takes you too long to get the vocab and grammar together. So is it the ideas or is it the language? Again, it depends. There could be several people in this situation, but for different reasons. So again, you need to figure out, like, why is this happening to you? I also feel anxious about taking time to think of ideas during an exam. Is it okay to start with my experiences related to the question? No, just take your time and decide what you want to say. Choose one answer. Like, kind of take 2 or 3 seconds to think of your answer first. So again, just using that question as an example. But like, if the question is what's the most popular sport in your country, and you're going, I don't know. I guess when I was younger, a lot of people used to play, basketball. Okay, so I'll just talk about that. So in your head, you're saying you don't know, but at least choose what sport you're going to talk about and then go. So you're not going to think about what grammar will I use or what vocab will I use. You're not thinking about that, but just at least decide on the actual answer that you want to give. Neozov, hello to you. Hi, sir. I have difficulty speaking at length in part 3. Sometimes I have no idea about the question. That's why I can't explain and give examples to my ideas. What can I do? So again, you don't need to have you don't need to know about the topic. So you can talk about something that you don't know about in your own language. Just allow yourself to just say whatever comes to mind. You don't need to be right. You don't need to be an expert. You're just guessing. So don't feel a lack of knowledge is a reason not to talk. I had a student before, just an example from part 2. He told me that his part 2 was a disaster because he was asked to talk about a plant that grows, a wild plant that grows in his local area. And he said where he was from, it's all dry and there are no plants that grow naturally, that you have to water the ground. Like any farmers have to water the ground themselves. There's no rainfall. Anywhere that's untouched is just dry, cracked earth. And he said, and for that reason, I couldn't answer the question. I was like, well, what you just told me would have been perfect. So the fact that there is no wild plants growing in your area doesn't mean you can't talk about it. So his explanation of why he couldn't answer would have been a perfect answer in the test. So actually, where I live, there are no wild plants because da 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 da, and that would have been perfect. So if you're telling yourself, I know nothing about the topic, so I can't answer it, you're telling yourself that you have nothing to say. Whereas if you just go, okay, I'm just going to talk about this, and what would you say? What would you say to your friend in that situation? What would you say to your family members in that situation? Like, think of it this way. How often are you sitting down talking to, your friend, and they ask you something and you go, well, I don't know. And you just say nothing. That's the pressure you're putting on yourself in the IELTS test, is you're telling yourself you don't know and you have nothing to say. But if you're if you're in the company of a friend that you're close with, you would never be in a situation where you have nothing to say. You'd always just say, oh, I don't know, but probably this or probably that. So, I think you're probably making things more complicated for yourself than they need to be. Keep it simple. Don't expect yourself to be knowledgeable. Just talk. That's all. However, should we use idioms in writing task 2? No. Idioms, definitely no. In band descriptors, it's written that idiomatic language can be used. Yes, idiomatic language idioms are not what we're talking about. Idiomatic language would be phrases that you wouldn't understand from the individual words, but not idioms. So it's not like something like it's raining cats and dogs. We're not looking for that. But if you were to say something like, under the weather, meaning feeling sick, that would be a bit informal. But that type of phrase where you would need to know the meaning of those words together rather than the individual words, you would never guess that under the weather means feeling sick, unless you learned the full phrase under the weather. So it's that type of thing. But in general, no, you don't want to use idioms. Phrasal verbs would often be considered idiomatic as well. So those types of things. But again, I wouldn't go into the test saying, okay, I'm going to try to use idioms. Use the words that you would naturally use. Use the words that you can use comfortably, rather than going, okay, I'm going to try and use this type of word or that type of word. Like, think about what's your idea and try to communicate clearly. That's the main goal in the test. And if the problem is your vocab isn't good enough for the score you need, you have to go and study vocab for a few months. So it's not about, magically doing something in the test that'll increase your score. It's, be as clear as you can be using the language that you can comfortably use. If that's not good enough, you have to study vocab. Hi, Ikra. Andy, dear, sorry, dear sir, spelling mistakes, bullet points because of your tube typing. No problem. I understood what you're saying. No problem at all. Prince, sir, what happens when examiner understands that the candidate is lying? Will that impact the score? No. I recommend that you don't lie, because it's more difficult than telling the truth. When you're telling the truth, you're just talking about things you already know. You're talking about your memories that you already have. Whereas when you're lying, you're now inventing a story, and that's, that takes up some of your bandwidth, some of your brain power. But then you're also speaking in a second language, and that's already difficult. So now you're trying to do two difficult things. Whereas if you're just telling the truth, you don't need to think of the ideas, you just need to try and communicate them. So no, it will not bring down your score. You can lie in every answer and get a good score, but it's more difficult. It's more difficult. So it's not that lying is bad for your score, it's just it's more difficult. So in that way, you might not perform as well as if you were telling the truth. But it's not that the examiner will see you lying and go, oh, that's a lie, your score goes down. That does not happen. Lewis, sometimes I practice with native speaker on language exchange apps. Good. When I try and speak at their pace, they ask me to repeat myself more often. Ask them why. Ask them why. Like, if they're asking you to repeat, they're doing it because they don't understand you. If they're native speakers, it's not going to be a language problem. So it sounds more like something on your end. It could be like a lot of people, when they speak faster, they don't pause at the appropriate points in the sentence. Or it could be when you speak faster, you're starting to mumble more, or you're making other mistakes. ask why. You'll have to ask to find out. Mandeep, dear sir, in IELTS listening and reading, multiple choice questions are too difficult. So guide me. How can I solve this problem? So what you want to do is find out, why are they too difficult? Like, too difficult isn't a problem you can solve, because you need to find out, why are you getting those wrong? Why are they difficult? If you understand why they're difficult, well, then you can start to address the problem. Again, like, are they too difficult because the vocab? Okay, well, then do you need to improve your vocab? Are they too difficult because they're so long you forget what you're reading? Well, maybe you need to, read smaller chunks. Are they difficult because you're trying to listen to the audio and read the questions at the same time and listening? Well, in that case, try to break it down into smaller pieces. Again, I have a video on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page about how to break it down, where you read the question before, make notes during the audio, and then match your note with the correct answer after the audio. So, it could be a range of things, but for reading and listening, you always want to figure out, why is it difficult? So saying it's difficult isn't something you can fix. But if you understand why it's difficult, then, you're getting closer to the solution. Sir, sometimes I find it hard to stay on topic when doing writing tasks too. Some people say that planning helps. Do you have any tips on how to plan properly? Yeah, 100%. Planning is so, so important. Because if you're writing the essay, if you're just coming up with the ideas as you're writing the essay, it's very, very easy to go off topic. Whereas if you write the plan first, you can be really critical, like write down what your idea is, check if it's relevant, check if it's specific, write down how you're going to develop that idea, check if the development is actually about the question. Check if the development is actually about the question, check if the development is actually about the idea. And then you go and you do the same thing for the next idea. Yeah, 100%. That's what you should do. It's very important. What are the qualifications of an IELTS examiner? How to become an IELTS examiner? So you need to teach for a few years. You need to be teaching IELTS for a few years. I think it's 2 years, teaching IELTS for 2 years. And then, like, most schools won't let you teach IELTS until you've been teaching English for a few years as well. You need to be at native English. You don't have to be a native English speaker, but you have to be at that level. And then it's just a matter of applying for the job when they're looking for people. I have a question regarding true, false, not given. In questions, it is written that the view of bilingualism has changed recently. But in passage, it is written last few decades, people are changing their... Okay, we didn't get the rest of that question. You're very welcome, Magnolia. No problem at all. Dear sir, in academic reading, summary in box questions are too difficult because we have to find synonyms which are sometimes too tough. So how can we solve the questions and also matching headings? So what it seems like, I do the test the other way around in the reading test. So it sounds like you're looking at the question and then trying to find the answer. But I go the other way around, where I'll read the first paragraph of the text and then I will go through all the questions and see which ones I can answer. So what you'll find is, if there are synonyms, if there are words you don't understand, there's a better chance you can guess them from the context because you've read the whole thing. And you don't end up searching really, really quickly trying to find a word, trying to find a synonym. I'm very bad at scanning. The truth is, I'm very bad at scanning. I tried it. I used to try it that way. Like when I first started teaching IELTS, I used to try scanning. I'm terrible at scanning. I always miss the word. I lose focus. I start daydreaming. Like the word's right in front of me and I scan past it and I go down to the bottom and back up at the top, going through the whole thing again. Absolute disaster. So for me, I mean, if you're good at scanning, by all means do it. For me, I'm terrible at scanning. So what I found is going, like I said, read the first paragraph and then look at all 13 questions, see which ones you can answer. Doing it that way is a lot easier. In terms of matching headings, normally the problem you'll encounter is 2 of the headings seem to have the same meaning. The reason they seem to have the same meaning is because of your English level. So if your English level was higher, you would understand how they're different. But at your level, they seem to have the same meaning. There's nothing you can do about that. Of course, you can go and study English for a year and then come back. But when you're in the test, there's nothing you can do about that. So you just have to guess. Does shadowing native speakers help us to improve pronunciation and intonation? Yeah, especially for intonation. I think for intonation and sentence stress, shadowing is very helpful. Yeah, because if it's not the way you speak in your own language, like when you pause, which words you stress, how the intonation goes, if it's different from your language, shadowing is very, very helpful. And just listening, even listening to English and shadowing English, very, very helpful for sure. Can you give us an example of idiomatic language for task 2? Off the top of my head, no, to be honest. Went up for increased. That would be idiomatic. Adil, sir, while I am doing practice speaking test with my partner, he usually points out that I do not use cohesive devices while speaking. How important is this issue? In speaking, you wouldn't use like the types of cohesive devices from writing task 2. So in writing task 2, you might say however, but in speaking, you're much more likely to say but. So the types of cohesive devices you would use in speaking aren't as academic. Yeah. Lewis, if we translate phrases we don't know how to say in English, does that harm our fluency improvement? If we translate phrases we don't know how to say in English, I'll be honest, I don't understand the question, Lewis. So do you mean like you have a phrase in your language and you translate the individual words? Like very often they don't translate correctly. But then does it harm your fluency? I honestly, I don't understand. I don't understand the question. Prince Naheen, sir, is it true that the more difficult question the candidates will get asked in part 3 speaking, the higher chance that you deserve a good band? Yeah, so what they'll do is the higher level students, the higher level candidates will be asked more challenging questions. But the truth is, when you're in the test, you're not even going to know the difference. Because if you're a low level student, you're going to find the questions challenging. And if you're a high level student, you're going to find the questions challenging. So it's up to the candidate, it's up to the examiner to ask you questions that are challenging. So no matter who you are, they will be challenging. You'll get to a point where the questions are quite difficult. So it doesn't matter whether your level is high or low, the experience will be the same for you in the test. Mandeep, thank you very much. Sir, not only are you a great IELTS teacher, but also a super human being. Oh, thank you. Sumaya, in question, it was written that the view of bilingualism has changed recently, but in passage it was written in past few decades, people are changing their minds towards bilingualism. Why is this? Why this is true? Is recently means 20 or 30 years, as it said, last few decades. I mean, within the context of the meaning of recently depends on the context, right? It depends on the context. So, you know, if you're talking about, if the essay has been talking about, you know, across 200-300 years, then recently would be, you know, 20, 30 years. But like, you know, if I said, you know, I watched a movie recently, that's not going to mean 20 or 30 years ago. So it's like, it's subjective. It depends on the context. It's not subjective. It depends on the context. So, you know, if we're talking about human history, well, 20, 30 years isn't that long. But if we're talking about, you know, what you've been doing recently, we're not talking about 20, 30 years ago. So it depends. It would depend on the context. How to score good in pronunciation part of speaking. Find out what mistakes you're making and fix those mistakes. That's what you need to do. Make sure you're pronouncing all the sounds incorrectly. Sorry, make sure you're pronouncing all the sounds correctly. If you're doing that, start working on individual words. If you're doing that, start working on sentence stress and the various features of connected speech. If you're doing that, start working on intonation. So you just kind of have to build on top of what you have. Is it okay to have personal examples in part 3? So you're not supposed to talk about yourself in part 3 of the speaking test. So, you know, you wouldn't say, again, I'll just use that. What's the most popular sport in your country? So you can't say, oh, well, my favorite sport is hockey. It has to be, in my country, the most popular sport is hockey. And then you can talk about your experiences, as in, when I was at school, everybody was playing hockey, all of my friends. And nowadays, even my friends, some of my friends still play hockey. Even as adults, you'll see a lot of people playing hockey. There's a field at the back of my apartment block where people play hockey every weekend. So these are all examples about things I've seen and people I know. That's fine, but it's just not directed in on yourself, where it's like, I play hockey every weekend. I play hockey in a field at the back of my apartment. That's not okay. Okay, so I have a question from Lewis, and we'll leave it at that. This will be the last question. One approach is to read a lot, find and learn how to say in English a specific idea that's in your mind. It can take a long time. So when students want to say a phrase and don't know how to say it in English, they use translators. But it seems to me that can affect their fluency improvement. Yeah, so one skill that you need, part of being fluent, is being able to communicate your ideas when you don't have the exact word that you need. So what you're talking about is somebody who's speaking, as soon as they run into that hurdle, into that obstacle, they'll turn out, get their dictionary, find the word, and then they can come back and continue. Yeah, that's not good for fluency. So the ability to continue when you don't have the words you need, that is part of fluency. And if you never practice that, you won't have that skill. And of course, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have that aspect of fluency that you need. Because, when you're speaking a second language, there will always be times where you don't have the exact words you need, but you just use the words you have to get that point across and continue. Definitely. Okay, I think that's all we have time for today. So, yeah, we'll be back next week. I'll have another live stream on another topic. As I said, if any of you want to join my courses or use my one-on-one services, feel free to reach out. And yeah, take care. Bye.